Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another video. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to use Lightroom to edit your photos. Now, I'm not going to be going through every single little setting. I'm just going to be going through the settings that I use the majority of the time. So let's get started. So on the screen right now, you're just going to see a picture of me that I took a while ago. First things first, when you get into Lightroom, you're going to want to import your photos. But I'll just show you quickly in this folder here. There's a .arw file, and that's Sony's format of RAW file. So that's the RAW file there. This is the JPEG. So when you're editing in Lightroom, you want to be using the RAW file because it's the most information. It allows you to push and pull things a lot further than the JPEG. So make sure you are shooting in RAW if possible, because Lightroom, there's just a lot more things you can do in Lightroom if you are shooting in RAW. So what you want to do is make sure the library tab here is highlighted, and then you want to go to import. And this is where you can search your computer for where the files are that you want to edit. So I've just made a little folder on my desktop, which I'll just find now. All right, so I've got the folder selected where the image is that I want to edit. Normally you may have more than one image in here. That's it there. So just gonna make sure that's ticked, and you can use the buttons here to check all of them or uncheck all of them. But we've just got the one in here, then we're just gonna press import. So this will just import the image into the library, and then what you can do, you've got all this library here, so that what you can do is basically import different catalogs into your Lightroom. So if you work on multiple jobs, you can have them as catalogs in Lightroom, which is really helpful. I actually don't use the cataloging a whole much. Once I'm done editing them and the project's it's been some time since the project's been delivered, I usually delete those catalogs, and I keep the files, but I delete the catalogs. So I don't really get into that all that much. But what you want to do now is head over to the develop module. So just up here, you want to click develop. And now you can see the image here, and what we're going to do is go through some of the options all down here, and I'm basically just going to explain what each of these do. I don't use every single one of them, so forgive me if I'm not fully educated on every single little setting, but I'll go through the ones that I do use. I'll tell you exactly what they do and why you'd use them. So we're going to ignore these ones up here, these tools up here, just for now. We're going to come back to them very last. But as you can see in Lightroom, it's really helpful because you've got your histogram here. It's showing you the shadows, the midtones, the highlights, all of that stuff. And if you move your mouse away, it shows you your camera settings that you use. So I was at ISO 100 at 67mm on my lens at f7.1, and I was shot at 1/60th of a second. Now this was using a flash as well. I shot at f7.1 because I wanted to make sure that the majority of things were in focus in this image, because obviously it's like a whole room shot, so I don't just want to have focus on one thing. So let's start with the profile here. I usually just leave on Adobe Color. Now, if you want to work in black and white, you can just flick this to black and white there, and that's simple as that. Then you can make adjustments still, but we're gonna work in color. First thing you got here is the white balance little module here. Now what you can do, if you want to set your white balance, you can grab this little eyedropper tool and pick on something that's white or gray in your image, just like that, and it will adjust the white balance to correct it. Now that looks pretty good. Let's go to what it was before. It's quite blue, and it just adds a little bit of warmth there to make it warmer. Now you do have these ones here as well, daylight. So depending on where you shot the image, you can choose these. And the good thing about a RAW file is the white balance isn't baked into the image, so you can change this quite easily. That's if you shot in a tungsten light, which is very, very, very warm, so it's trying to cool it down, but we didn't. There's a fluorescent light, and then flash is what it should be close to, because we did shoot with a flash, but there was also some ambient light coming in as well. But we can try auto as well, and that did a pretty good job. It's very similar to what the little white balance selector did. So that's white balance. Anyway, you can also adjust these manually, so we can cool the image off or warm it up. Then you've also got tint, which tints the image from like a purple to a green. But we'll put that back on auto because it did a pretty good job. Now the next module here is basically your exposure. So you got your highlights, shadows, and things like that. You can press auto. I don't always like what Lightroom does to the image. Sometimes it does a great job, or it gives you a good starting point, but we're just gonna reset this, and I'm gonna show you exactly what every one of those does. Let's put that back to auto. At any time you wanna reset what you've done, you can press reset, or obviously Control Z, you can undo the last thing that you've done. So first one here is exposure. That's basically how bright the image is. So if you push that up, it's gonna get brighter and brighter and brighter. And then you can bring that down as well, so it's darker. We'll leave that at 0. I think it's pretty well exposed. We'll come back to it. Contrast is obviously contrast, so the difference between the darks and the lights. So if you push that up, it's gonna be, the darks are gonna get darker, the whites are gonna get whiter, or lights are gonna get lighter. Basically highlights will get brighter, and then if you pull it the other way, it's less contrast. So as you can see, it's pretty flat. It's a pretty flat looking image, so let's just reset that. Highlights is the highlights of the image, whether you want to pull them down or push them up. So you can pull the highlights down. As you can see, the bright areas of the image are getting pulled down, and you can push them up as well. Reset. You can reset them also, by the way, by double clicking on the little selector there. And then shadows, same thing. You can go darker on the shadows, or you can pull the shadows up, which is really good if you've got an underexposed image. The whites are just same kind of thing, highlights and shadows, except it's just adjusting the whites and the black. So if you've got any black in your image, it'll drop those down and lift them up. In this little other module here called Presence, you've got texture. So it basically increases the texture in the image. So you can probably see, let's zoom in down here. You can see the texture on this quilt. As you pull the texture up, you'll see that get more and more defined. Now clarity is kind of similar. It adds clarity to the image, but be careful with the clarity slider because it is very easy to make something look really overdone and fake. As you can see there, it looks a bit weird. But it is helpful just to bring some clarity back in your image. And then dehaze, which is also very helpful. It gets rid of any haze in the image, but if you do it on an image where there is no haze, it'll just start to do what it's doing now, make it darker. But that can be helpful if you've got like a bit of a fog in your image or something like that, just to take a bit of that out. Next one here, we've got vibrance. So that's how vibrant the colors are in the image. As you can see, it's getting more and more vibrant. And saturation is very similar. It's how saturated the colors are in the image. So, you know, how red something is or how orange something is or whatever. So you can see if we push this up, it just looks out of control crazy, but that's what that does. So let's just play around with this. I'm gonna press auto and then we're gonna play around with it a little bit more. So that's looking pretty good, but I'd prefer the shadows to get pulled down just a little bit because I like the mood. I don't want anything to just look flat. I want there to be a bit of mood there. So let's go there. Highlights, we'll probably keep them where they are. Now this shadow, you can see of the lampshade there. I've actually got another exposure of that with ambient light with no flash where I'll remove that later, but that's a Photoshop thing. We're not really getting into that. And also this gap down here under the skirting board, I'd fix that in Photoshop as well, but we're not gonna be doing really any Photoshop, just Lightroom. Contrast here, let's just, I think maybe, probably leave that at 0, just pump it up just a little bit. Texture, let's bring a little bit of texture in, maybe the tiniest bit of clarity. And dehaze, it's not gonna do much, but we'll just probably leave it about there. That's looking pretty decent. Vibrance, I think is probably a bit too high, so we'll pull that down a little bit. Saturation, might bring that up just a few. There we go. And now the next thing we're gonna go to is the tone curve. So it's very similar to the things above that. You've got shadows, you've got the darks, you got the lights, and it's basically the shadows, midtones, and highlights. Now, if you pull this up, basically you're pulling the shadows up. So it's almost like pulling that shadow slider up, as you can see. So it's very similar to what's above here, but it's kind of like another way of doing it. And region is just where it's actually affecting the highlights, lights, darks, and shadows. I don't really use the tone curve a whole lot. I use it sometimes, but I mainly just focus on using these ones here. So next one we have, this is an awesome module, part of Lightroom. What you have here, you can adjust the hue, saturation, and luminance of the image. So the hue is basically the color. Saturation is how pronounced that color is, or like if something's red, how red it is, or how faded red it is type of thing. And luminance is how bright it is. So let's just say I wanted to change the hue, and this quilt is almost orange. So if we pull this over here, you'll see the color of that quilt changing to like the yellow, or we can go back here to like the red. So it's a cool way of changing the colors of things. I probably wouldn't use it to change the color of things, but let's just say we thought the quilt was a bit too orange in the image. I'd use that to pull the orange down. As you can see, it's only affecting the oranges of the image. And you can do the same with all those colors there. Now this is really helpful because I do a lot of real estate and architectural photography. It's very, very helpful to use this when there might be a bit of color cast in the room, like there might be a window that's casting a blue light throughout the image, and I'll pull the blue slider down to get rid of that. And it's very, very helpful. But yeah, in this image, it was shot pretty clean, so I don't really need to do a whole lot with this. I'll show you it anyway, but luminance, let's go pull the orange up. You can see it just makes the oranges brighter and darker. So very, very cool tool. I use that quite a lot. Probably leave this the way it is. I might pull the saturation out of the quilt. Actually, I might leave it the way it is. It looks pretty good. Next one here is split toning. So this is where you can adjust the shadows and highlights. You can put different type of shades of color on the highlights or the shadows. So let's just pull the saturation up here. This is gonna make the highlights whatever color this is here. So let's just say we wanted to make the highlights like an orange color. We can just move this over. Or like we wanted to make the highlights blue. and you can control the saturation of that just there. So it only affects the highlights and the shadows. We're going to reset that, and we can do the same with the shadows. It's a very common like cinematic thing to have blue shadows, just like this. It's not really going to look good on this image because it's not a cinematic image. And then have your highlights like an orangey teal color. It's a popular thing when it comes to like video cinematic grading, but I don't really use the split toning all that much unless I'm going for a certain effect. The next one here is detail. This is where you can add some sharpening to the image. So what I do first, I hold down the Alt key and then I click this masking lever here and I slide that over, and it basically shows you what is being affected. So what we're going to be sharpening. So it should load in a second. There you go. So that's the areas in white are the areas we're going to be sharpening. So we can leave that like that, and we can bring the amount of sharpening up. So we'll zoom in. It's just loading and pull that sharpening all the way up. You can see it's a lot sharper. I don't go all the way crazy like that because it can make things look weird. I might only sharpen them a tad, or I might not even sharpen them at all, but that's pretty cool setting there in Lightroom. The next one down here, we have noise reduction. And if you've shot an image with a high ISO and you've got a bit of noise, this can really help to remove that noise. This image is pretty clean, so I probably wouldn't use it, but you can just basically pull this up and down. I don't really play with the detail and contrast all that much. I just pull this up and it can help to remove a little bit of that high ISO noise and any other noise in the image. So next one I'm gonna go straight to is lens corrections. So as you can see, Lightroom's detected that I've shot this on the Sony 24 to 240mm lens and it's applied the corrections already. So if I turn this off, you'll see the image change, the corners get darker and it's kind of pin cushioned in. So Lightroom knows that with this lens, it needs to remove some of the darkness around the corners, which is called vignetting, and it needs to pull the middle of the image out a bit. So it basically just corrects the issues with that lens. And you can press remove chromatic aberration. That removes, it's not in this image, but in some images you get like purple fringing around the edges of things. That helps to remove that. Now you can also play around with this manually and adjust the distortion. And that's basically doing the pin cushion or the fishbowl kind of look. And you can do that manually. And vignetting is the same as what I described before, that darkness around the corners of the image. You can do that manually as well. But yeah, like I said, Lightroom's detected that lens because of the X of data. There's data as part of this raw file that tells Lightroom what lens was on the camera when you shot this image. Next one we have is transform. This is where you can adjust the verticals, horizontals, rotate the image, all that kind of thing. This is very, very important for architectural and real estate photography because you want the verticals to be vertical, dead straight. Or if you're shooting like a landscape, you want the horizon line to be level. So you might use any of these automatic tools here. So if I do vertical, Lightroom's gonna guess what's vertical. And I think this should be pretty good because I shot it pretty vertical. Yeah, it hasn't done anything because it knows it's pretty vertical as it is, but you can also do all these adjustments manually. So instead of moving these little levers, you can actually just use your keyboard up and down keys, and you can see the levels, the vertical lines there are being moved around. But we'll leave that as it is. Then you can rotate the image there. You can adjust the aspect here. Then you got scale, which is just the size of the image. X offset, which is where the image is left and right. And then Y offset, which is where the image is up and down, basically. So reset all of those because it's looking pretty good as it is. And we'll go down to effects. This is where you can apply a vignette to your image. So you get that kind of darkness around the borders. You can pull this down and add a vignette. Sometimes I add vignettes to my image, sometimes I don't. It can help to drag the viewer's eye to the middle of the image, which is cool. But you can go the other way with this and make it a white vignette, which is also cool. You've also got settings within the vignette, like where the midpoint is, which means basically you can see that glowing area shrinking and growing. And roundness, just how round the vignette is, whether it's round or an oval, and feather, how soft the edges of the vignette are. So I tend to go for something a bit softer like that, but with this image, I wouldn't use a vignette, to be honest, so I'll just turn all this back off. Grain, you can add grain to the image. Sometimes that looks pretty cool. I don't really add grain to my image a whole lot. This is something I don't really use, but it's more about calibrating the colors, so you can tint the shadows, change what the reds should look like in your image, the greens and the blues. I don't play with them all that much because I find the images straight out of my camera pretty good once I've done the other adjustments. So they're pretty much all the tools I use in Lightroom, but we're going to quickly talk about these tools up here. So obviously here you've got the crop overlay. This allows you to crop your image. So if you select that, you can choose an aspect ratio. Original is just the original aspect ratio, and then you can crop your image just like this. So you can choose a little bit. It'll stick in this aspect ratio, as you can see. If you want to crop just any ratio you like, you can just click this padlock here and it will allow me to crop whatever I like, just like that. So we're just gonna press escape to get out of that because I don't want to crop it. This one here is a spot removal tool. So what we'll do, let's just zoom in quickly. We'll find something we want to remove. So you might be able to see this area on the paint. There's like a defect on the paint, a little bit of a bump. So we'll click the spot removal tool and we'll make the size of it smaller. And we're going to click on that spot and then click somewhere else that's like the similar color or texture that doesn't have the spot, and Lightroom will basically swap and blend those in. So if you press done here, you'll see that little spot is now gone. I prefer Photoshop to do this kind of thing, like the spot healing and things like that, but it is good that Lightroom does have that included. Red eye correction, I never use. Cameras these days, they're pretty good with red eye correction. Graduated filters, these are very, very cool. So what you can do, let's just add one here. You can basically just drag down and it's a filter that's like a rectangle shape that it goes from the strong part of the filter and then it starts to fade out. So let's just say if this was a landscape photo, I should have loaded a landscape photo up to do this, but for the sake of this tutorial, we'll just leave it like this. Let's pull the exposure back to 0. Anything you change in here will affect only this graduated filter. So let's just say we're doing a landscape photo and we wanted to make the sky a bit bluer. We can move the temperature over to the blue and you can see how that's worked there. And now you can drag this up and down. My computer's lagging a little bit because I'm recording the screen, but you can see how it fades out nicely. So let's just leave that like that for now. You can also adjust the contrast, highlight, all of this stuff here you can also adjust just in this graduated filter, which is handy. So let's press done on that. And the next one we have is basically the same thing, but it's a radial filter. So instead of being a rectangle, it's a circle. There you go. So let's just say we got this and moved it. Whoops. And we wanted to just maybe make this plant or this little, let's just say we wanted to make this area here where the little plant is. We wanted to change something there. Let's just say we want to lower the exposure. Obviously it's doing everything else now. So we've got to make sure that invert is selected. And now it's going to affect where the plant is. So you can adjust the exposure where the plant is. If you want to draw some focus to that plant, you can increase the exposure there. Yeah, so you can basically do anything you want with that filter. I'm going to delete this one. To delete them, you just click on that. I'll show you just again. To delete them, just click on the little black dot there and then press delete on your keyboard and it's gone. Press done once you've finished with that effect. The next one here is a brush. So it does the same thing, but you can brush manually whatever you like. So let's just say we wanted to just paint these bed sheets and do something with those. We can paint them just like this. And then you can change just where we've brushed. So you can see the exposure when I lift that, it's only affecting that area I brushed. So if you want to see an overlay of where you've brushed, you can tick this box just here and it'll show you exactly where you've brushed. So if you missed an area, you can just paint that in. You can grow and shrink the size of the brush by using the left and right. The one on the right of the P is the left bracket and the one on the right of that one is the other one, which makes it bigger and smaller. It's just like this. And you can adjust other things down here, like the size of the brush, which we just did, the feather. So that bit on the outside around the outside of the brush is the feather. Flows basically how much comes out. So if you imagine a paintbrush, it's like kind of putting more paint on the brush. But if you've made a mistake, what you can do is hit erase and you can remove some of that as well, as you can see. So let's go back up here. We can make some adjustments. I'll turn that off for a second. We can make some adjustments just to the area that we've painted, which is very handy. So you might have a part in your image that's a little bit overexposed or underexposed. You can paint that part in and lift the exposure or contrast, highlights, do all that kind of thing. It's really cool. So I'm going to delete this part. Now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to show you something with this graduated filter again. So we go back to the graduated filter. We'll be able to select that one we made before. And let's just say this is a landscape photo and the blue sky came down over a mountain or something. Just like you can see here, there's some of that blue has come out over this lampshade. What you can do is actually just go to the brush here. And we can go to erase. And we can erase part of this graduated filter. So let's just zoom in, Control plus or Command plus if you're on a Mac. And what we'll be able to do is paint out the graduated filter on certain parts of the image. So as you can see here, we're getting rid of that blue on the lamp. Obviously you do a better job than that, but you can see here, wherever we paint, we'll get rid of that effect. So the computer's a bit slow, but you can see there I've removed the blue, that graduated filter effect from that area. So yeah, they're about all the tools I use in Lightroom. Obviously over here you've got presets, so if you buy presets from someone or you've got some built in to Lightroom, you can see what they look like. And sometimes you can just throw a filter and they look good straight away. You can throw a filter on just like that, and then you can make further edits over here. One filter isn't going to be perfect for all images, but let's just reset this and we'll have a play around with some of these filters. So let's go to Vivid. That looks pretty cool, but what we can do from here is further change these just like we did before, do these all manually. There's some creative filters as well, so you can see the sample up what it's going to look like up there. Yeah, they're pretty cool. I don't really play around with presets a whole lot. When I do a lot of real estate shoots, I usually have a preset that just helps me with the beginning of the image, but then I always tweak the rest of things over here. Another quick tool that's really cool is you compare before and after views. So that's what the image looked like before. That's what it looked like with all the stuff we've done here. As you can see, if I change something here, it'll change here, but this is what we started with. That's the original right there. So that's a cool view to have. And you can just click here to go back to normal. Okay, so just to give you a little bit more of an idea of how the film strip down below here works, what I've done is I've loaded up a lot more images so you can see how the film strip works just down here. Now, let's just say we've got this one image here and we've made some changes. So let's up the exposure, it looks crazy. Let's just press auto. What you can do, you can sync these settings across all of your images. So I wouldn't do it in this scenario because all the images are just taken at totally different times and none of them are the same. But let's just say you did a portrait session with someone, the lighting and everything stayed relatively the same. They just posed differently. You can have to edit every single image exactly the same. You can just edit one of them till it's perfect, and then you can sync those settings across all of those images. So I'll show you how to do that now. So let's just say we've made changes to this image here, which we have. You can select this first one, just like this. Then you can hold down Shift and click at the end, or you can individually select the images by holding down Control while you're selecting those images. And you can just press sync. So what it's going to do is sync any settings we've changed on this first one here. It'll sync them all the way across the selected images. It's going to ask me here what I want to sync, so what options or what settings that I want to sync to these other images, and then you can just press synchronize. So what it's going to do right now, it's going to make the same changes that we made to this first image to all of those images we've selected. So they're not going to look any good because all the images are very, very different, but you can just click on them and see what it's done to those. Now, another way of doing that, you can click on your first image again, you can right click, you can go to develop settings, copy settings, select which settings you want to copy and press copy, and then click on your second image, and let's just reset this so you can see how it works. Okay, so we've reset this image right here, and what we're going to do is then right click on it, develop settings, and paste settings. And it's going to paste all those settings we copied onto this image here. Now, the reason these don't look the same is because my camera settings were different. This one was shot at 1/80th of a second, which is a faster shutter speed than this one here. I think that was 1/30th of a second. So this one's going to be brighter than the other one, but what we can do is just then come onto this image and adjust it individually so we can up the exposure on this one, and they look quite similar. So yeah, that's about all the tools I use. I'm going to show you how to export the images now. So let's just say you wanted to export all of them. You could press Control or Command A, and you can see there that it's selected all the images in our film strip. We can go to File, Export, and then we're greeted here with the export settings here. So we can export to the same folder as the original photo, which is what I do, but then I put them in a subfolder called LR Edited, so Lightroom Edited. So I know any image in this folder are ones that I've edited in Lightroom. File naming, you can rename the files, which I don't usually do. Whoops. Video, I leave that as it is. File settings, here you can change the format of the image, so it can be JPEG, PSD, which is a Photoshop file, a TIFF image, DNG, or original, which original will be the RAW file again, but I usually save out to JPEG. Quality, I usually keep it 100, but if you are using these to deliver on the internet, you can lower that quality there. You can also, this is a very, very handy feature, you can limit the file size to a certain size. So you might have a client that says, we need these images that can't be any bigger than 2,000 kilobytes each. You can set that here, which is really, really handy. Image sizing is another helpful one. You can export the image at different sizes. So let's just say we could export them at 50% of the original size, which is very helpful because photos out of this camera are quite large. But I use that if I'm trying to down res images to send to clients. Metadata, I usually leave that as it is. Watermark, you can chuck watermarks on automatically, which I don't do. And that's basically it. I press export and all those images, the edited image will end up in this folder here, but you can choose different options as to where you want it to go, but that's basically how I use it. And that's basically it. So I know I didn't go through every single little setting in Lightroom, but they are the majority of the settings that I use. I do a lot of the heavy lifting in Photoshop when it comes to adjusting colors and things like that, only because I've used Photoshop a little bit longer. And I'm a bit more accustomed to Photoshop than I am with Lightroom. So yeah, I hope that helps. If you've got any questions whatsoever, just let me know in the comments below and I'll be more than happy to help out. So hope you enjoyed this video and I'll see you guys soon. Thanks very much for watching.